Thank you so much, Mr. Lakhani, and thank you to everyone who's watching us this morning. Shilpa, our opening batch lady, is ready, and Dr. Kasturi and Dr. Preeti and I welcome you all. And this is the 4th time that this particular instruction course is being held. We thank you for all the love. We thank you for coming in every time and keeping us motivated. Without any further ado, now I request Shilpa to take it over from here and start presenting, and she'll be taking us through the anatomy of the face, which is the most important thing that we all need to know. Remember, Botox and fillers, anyone can do. Anyone can fire a gun. But the point is, we need to fire the gun safely such that our patients remain safe. So welcome to Facial Aesthetics, and hope you all have a great learning experience. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Devraj. So sharing my screen now. Good morning, all of you. So I'll be discussing the relevant facial anatomy as based on the cadaveric dissection pertinent to fillers injection and the neuromodulator injections. Why do we need to learn anatomy first of all? As Dr. Devraj very well mentioned, I am unable to shift to the next slide actually now.
You checked it, no? See, you are telling it's a myth.
Click the mouse on PPT.
I told you, no?
In presentation, the mouse click करें आप
अपना. Okay, fine. I'll do that. So thanks. So why do we need to learn anatomy first of all before any surgical procedure or any surgery? So that's very right, as mentioned by Dr. Devraj also, that this learning anatomy is the most important thing for safe and efficacious injections, and also to achieve consistent results each and every time when we repeat our procedures. So in this talk, I'll be taking you through the anatomy of the upper face initially, then the anatomy of the middle and the lower face, and then I'll be ending with vasculature of the face, which is the most important part as far as injections are concerned. Coming on to the anatomy of the upper face and starting with the forehead area. In the forehead area, thanks to Dr. Roderick, who has shooted so very well this cadaveric dissection video, and I'm using them to show you all the cadaveric dissection of the face. So the most important is the frontalis muscle, which is the only elevator of the brow. It's a superficial muscle and it bifurcates in a V-shaped face pattern, as you can see here, not in this cadaveric specimen though. And the point to be taken care of is that while you're injecting neuromuscular agents, inject superficially here as it is a superficial muscle. This is a danger zone where supratrochlear artery and supraorbital vessels here, supratrochlear hair and supraorbital hair emerge. And the supratrochlear, mind you, can have many deep branches. So when you are injecting, retrograde flow from these vessels of the fillers can even lead to blindness. And in multiple reviews, glabellar injections are the most common of filler injections leading to blindness. Thus, we need to take note of it. Secondly, when you're injecting neuromuscular agents in the forehead area here, inject 2 centimeters above the supraorbital rim here and stay superficial. Injecting deep in this corrugator muscle, as shown here, can lead to brow ptosis. And procerus muscle here runs vertically. That should be taken care of. Further on in this area, as you see, this frontalis muscle, there is corrugator and a procerus muscle. Then we see the supraorbital nerves which run in the middle area here. And injecting here can cause neuromas and hematomas. So inject in small bolus. When you are injecting fillers, inject small bolus and with a small slow push. Do not inject fast. Corrugator muscles, as we know, lie deep. This is the fusion area of the temporalis muscle and the frontalis muscle here. This demarcates, this whitish area demarcates the fusion area. So thus this further on, as we move to the temporal area is defined by a line joining from the root of hallux to the lateral canthus area here, and superiorly it is demarcated by the end of the fusion zone. As we lift the skin, we see the superficial temporoparietal fascia. Here is the danger zone 2. At the root of the helix here, temporal artery becomes very superficial, comes above a finger width above the lateral brow here. So seen clearly in this picture, a 1 finger breadth above the lateral brow here, the superficial temporal artery. When you inject, take care of this artery. It travels in the superficial temporoparietal fascia here. Frontal branch of the temporal artery anastomosis with the superior orbital and the supratrochlear vessels, and thus again the retrograde flow can cause vision loss. This is the middle temporal vein, again a very large vein in this area which drains into the jugular vein. The emboli here can travel and even cause life-endangering consequences. It lies about a finger breadth above the zygomatic arch as was shown. So the take home is that inject superficially between the skin as seen in this cadaveric specimen. This is the superficial temporoparietal fascia. So this and the skin, inject between the skin and the superficial temporoparietal fascia here and do not go deep. This is the safe zone. The superficial zone is the safe zone. So this is the skin, the superficial temporoparietal fascia, inject between these two. This completes the anatomy of the upper face. And remember, when we are discussing anatomy of the upper face, obviously we give filler injections and mainly it pertains to the neuromuscular agent injections. So coming on to the next, the anatomy of the mid face and the lower face. The most important structure in the mid face here is the facial nerve, which lies deep at the root of the ear lobule and gives frontal nerve here and the superior temporal nerve branch above the zygomatic arch. These lie a finger breadth above, again above the zygomatic arch area. Take home is that don't inject neuromuscular agents and the fillers over these nerves basically. And all the aesthetic contours, as we know, are formed by the sustained fullness in the facial fat compartments. These are the superficial fat compartments. As we lift this layer, there are the deep fat compartments, and these are incorporated in between the mimetic muscles like platysma, pars, and temporoparietalis of the face. The filler injections actually are given in this zygomatic area in females and the malar eminence here in the males. So this green colored fat pad, which is the deep malar fat pad, is the fat pad where we need to inject fillers. As we peel off this superficial fat pad area, we see this deep one. And these are the infraorbital nerves and vessels. Whenever you're injecting in this area, inject laterally and massage the filler medially so that you don't traumatize these nerves and vessels area. Further on, as we lift up this superficial fat pad area, there are deep fats, and this is the facial vein, a branch of facial vein which comes from deep to superficial fat pads. So while we are injecting in these layers, one must inject deep in this fat pad itself so as not to endanger and enter in this vein. Next, coming on to the perioral area, this superficial fat pad area next to the corner of the mouth has 4 major important mimetic muscles below it. The zygomaticus major, the zygomaticus minor, we can see both the roots and the heads of the muscle here. The DAO, depressor anguli oris, which is here, and another fan-shaped muscle. So the zygomatic is being shown here. Whenever you inject neuromuscular agents here for the pro-feed, remember not to inject at the origins of zygomaticus because it will weaken the smile and impair the smile. Yes. So here at the angle of the mouth, we must remember the depressor anguli oris as seen in this picture here and its relationship with depressor labii inferioris. This again a fan-shaped muscle. The DLI, depressor labii inferioris, is a deep muscle and depressor anguli oris is a superficial muscle which is lateral and DLI is medial. So whenever you're injecting Do not inject and depressor labii inferioris. Again, it will lead to the weakness of the lower lip, difficulty in chewing, and smile of the patient. Next important thing is the masseter muscle in the mid and lower face. The strongest and the most powerful muscle in the human body, which lies deep to the buccal fat pad. Always ask the patient to clench whenever you're injecting, and while you're injecting, just to show how much deep you should go, this syringe has been taken in hand. The needle, see, it goes almost up till 1 centimeters into the masseter muscle. So one must inject around 1 to 1.2 millimeters deep if you want to inject the masseter muscles for masseter hypertrophy, let's say, or for bruxism, although it doesn't pertain here right now. Further, coming on to the last part of my talk, the vasculature of the face. The facial artery, which is the most important vasculature of the face, it starts lower down in the neck, goes up in a tortuous manner, and it lies lateral around the 1 thumb width, lateral to the commissure of the lips. So, and further when it goes, it branches into 2 arteries. Here, this artery is being seen, superior labial artery, which is deep to the orbicularis oris, and it lies at the junction of dry and wet vermilion. And the inferior labial artery here, it lies deep to the depressor labii inferioris, which I had shown in the previous slide. And it lies superior to the mucosa. So it's between mucosa and the DLI muscle. Whenever we are injecting here for the lips, one should inject 1 finger breadth below the ala as the facial artery goes up, because the facial artery becomes superficial here near the ala. So inject laterally and always massage medially towards the ala. As the artery goes up, it bifurcates and gives angular artery, which we all know as DCR surgeons, and it's a prominent artery. Whenever we are injecting, take care of injecting in this area again. As angular vein, especially, it drains into ophthalmic vein, which drains into cavernous sinus and thus becomes a danger zone again here. So this completes the route of the facial artery. Further on, nose is a very vascular structure in the mid face. Whenever we peel off the skin from the nose, as discussed, this is the danger zone being seen here. So when we come to the nose, it is a very vascular structure. We divide nose into 3 parts, the upper 1/3, the middle 1/3, and the lower 1/3. The lower 1/3 has multiple arborizations with the columnar branches and the labial vessels in the columnar area here. That's why it becomes a danger zone. And again, in the upper 1/3, the radix of the nose, the external nasal branch lies superficially. Thus, the superficial nasal area is danger zone. Inject always in this middle 1/3 here, not in the upper 1/3 and not in the lower 1/3. Inject in this middle 1/3. That too, as you touch your nose and try to move, inject subsmas, the mobile area of the nose. In nose, inject in middle 1/3, stay superficial, and you will stay safe as far as filler injections are concerned. So here I would conclude by saying that especially for the beginners, that before you take up any patient for neuromodulator injections or filler injections, revise your anatomy well, and slowly it will become your habit and you will not need to go through it again and again. You will know where to inject, which point to inject, and what gives what results. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you all.
Next, is it Preeti?
You have to stop the screen share. Yeah.
Shilpa, that was an excellent presentation, and you have showed the anatomy so well. Like every time I see your presentation, so many learning points I get it from your presentation. Congratulations, Shilpa. It was too good a presentation. Now I take this honor, my happiness, my privilege to introduce Dr. Preeti. Dr. Preeti is the medical director and consultant of DRRI Care and Oculoplasty Hospital. She is a prolific orator, a great surgeon, and a very dynamic and sweet personality. She is into oculoplasty for almost nearing 17 to 18 years, and she's doing amazing surgery, especially in aesthetics and fracture. So, Preeti, we are very much happy and privileged to have you in our course, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kasturi, for those kind words, and thank you for having me over. I'll be speaking on botulinum toxin injections for face rejuvenation. I have no financial disclosures to make. So whenever we look at the face, the eyes are the chief seat of beauty, and the periocular area is what strikes us first. And also, unfortunately, the aging changes are seen first in this area because the skin is thin and there is hardly any subcutaneous fat. And therefore, the wrinkles are appearing earlier in this area. And also, the emotional attributes are seen more prominently in the upper third of the face. And that's where Botox works maximum. And especially in the COVID era, where everybody is masked now, the upper face is what we need to focus on. Now, as we know, as the face ages, the skin becomes thin, there is loss of collagen, there is also deflation and descent of the superficial as well as the deep fat pads in the face, and there are structural changes and bony changes that occur with aging. And whenever you assess a patient for any aesthetic indication, you must keep in mind the gender differences. You must know what is normal feature in a male and a female aesthetics so that you don't feminize a male face and vice versa. And remember, for Botox, the doses are little higher in cases of male. Now, as I said, you must assess the face as a whole. Even if the patient comes to you only for forehead wrinkles or glabellar wrinkles, treating one area can lead to patient dissatisfaction. You must point out the other areas to the face and make a plan collectively. Also, you must know the lifestyle and profession of the patient. We have sometimes dancers, Bharatanatyam dancers coming to us, and they need the upper face expressions. And if you knock that off, it can affect them professionally. And most important is know the patient's aesthetic goals, because you cannot make everybody look like top-end models or, give them fox brows. They may not be able to carry it or be comfortable with that look. And the commonest problem that we have in aesthetics is the patient not having identity issues after the procedure. So you see a sad appearing face, you give Botox to those muscles and you give them an arched eyebrow, giving them a surprising appearance. That can be a problem in these cases. Now, whenever you assess the face, I do a 3-step assessment. That is, you assess the structural changes, you assess the volume loss, which are treated with fillers, and then you look at the surface lines and wrinkles and make an optimal and natural looking result for the patient. Make sure you have good photographs in the straight gaze, the oblique, and the side positions. Whenever the chin is elevated, you will see the younger appearing face, and when the chin is down, you will see the future of the patient, and that will help you in your assessment. Make sure you see the patient in animation, especially for Botox and fillers, because that will give you a lot of idea and give you an insight into your planning. Now, whenever you see wrinkles, if they are dynamic wrinkles, we treat them with Botox. And if they are static wrinkles, you prefer the fillers. Now, when you see the wrinkles, see the severity of the wrinkles, whether they are just kinetic or if they are hyperkinetic, you will need more dose, more frequent doses. And if they are hypertonic muscle in which they are not completely relaxing, you may have a residual wrinkle after Botox, and you must tell the patient that you would prefer a combination of treatment. Now, looking at this lion's face, you know he is angry because you can see the thick corrugator muscle here. And therefore, these muscles give you the facial expression and the emotional attributes to the face. And that is what you need to assess in your pre-procedure assessment. Like this face is looking sad because you know the corrugator procedures is acting, the depressor anguli oris is pulling the angle of the mouth down, and the mentalis is pulling the chin up. Whereas this face is happy because the angle of the mouth is up because of the orbicularis, because of the zygomaticus major, and the orbicularis and the zygomatic are pulling the cheek up and narrowing the eye. Now, you must rule out surgical indications first. Like in these two patients, they have very thick eyelids. You cannot expect to lift the eyebrow so much with Botox or fillers and give them a good appearance without surgical correction. Now, coming to Botox per se, it has been there for years together. Since the 1970s, we have Botox being used for strabismus and dystonias, and now it is widely used in aesthetic indications. It is produced from Clostridium botulinum, and the commonest exotoxin that is available is the type A toxin that we use. which is the most potent and lasts the longest. And it is a protein which is purified, stable, and in the crystalline form. We no longer we no longer refer it as Botox, because now we know that there are other products like Dysport and Xeomin available in the market. And therefore, we like to use non-proprietary names in the aesthetic literature like onabotulinum toxin for Botox, ebobotulinum toxin for Dysport, and incobotulinum toxin for Xeomin. And you must remember that the toxin units are not interchangeable in these products. So if you're using a 20 units of Botox, it may not be equal to 20 units of Dysport. Now, coming to the molecule per se, the molecule of Botox by Allergan has got two components, the protein, the neurotoxin component, which is 150 kilodalton, and the other associated proteins which stabilizes the molecule. These associated proteins are present in Botox and Dysport, but not in Xeomin. But the 150 kilodalton neurotoxin is present in all three, and therefore you can have neutralizing antibodies to the neurotoxin in all three products. Now, coming to the mechanism of action of Botox, it prevents the release of acetylcholine from the presynaptic terminal, and that is how it blocks the neuromuscular junction. So the Botox first gets internalized, it inhibits the SNER protein and prevents the release of acetylcholine. So the effect is seen about 4 to 7 days after the injection, and the muscle paralysis is reversed after 2 to 4 months. You must tell the patient that the effect will be seen only for 3 to 4 months, because after that, the collateral axonal sprouts come over in the presynaptic terminal and the effect goes off. Now, there has been a lot of talks about antibodies. Let me tell you, it is very, very rare. Whenever you have a patient who is a non-responsive patient to Botox, do not attribute it to the antibody formation. You must reassess your technique, your dosage, your storage, and your dilution, which are the commoner problems for non-response compared to immunogenicity. Now, always make sure that you give the smallest possible dose and maximize the time interval between the doses, because don't try to give the next dose within the 3 months, because then you have higher possibility of immunogenicity. Make sure you have an informed consent. You have to tell the patient the temporary nature of the correction, and also precise documentation, how many points you want to give, how much you want to give before the procedure. I like to give the patient post-procedure instructions in a written format so that there is no confusion. Now, coming to the Allergan Botox, how do you reconstitute it? The unreconstituted vial is kept at -5 degrees Celsius. Now, if you have a 100-unit vial, I like to use 4 ml of normal saline so that you have a concentration of 2.5 international units in 0.1 ml. So this is how you reconstitute it. This is the Allergan 50-unit Botox vial. When you open the vial, you will see the vacuum dried product, very small amount of product in the base of the vial. And then I'm injecting 2 ml of normal saline. Make sure that you don't create too much twirling or too many bubbles, because the molecule is very delicate. And then gently turn it and you will find a clear colorless solution. You take it in a 1 cc tuberculin syringe, and I like to use a 30 gauge needle for the injections. Now, out of all the contraindications, I would say the commonest and most important is acne. Many a times patients have active infection on the face. You must not give the injection at that time. I like to make the patient contract the muscle, because then you can see the wrinkles better. There is also increased uptake of the toxin when the patient contracts. Aim to weaken the muscle, not to paralyze it, and patients are reassessed after 2 weeks. The commonest indication is glabellar frown line like this, and the muscles responsible are procerus, corrugator, and the depressor supercilii and the middle part of the orbicularis. Now, as already Shilpa has told us, the corrugator head is deep. The procerus is a deep muscle, so inject deeply. Because if you go superficial, the frontalis is lying over it, and if you knock off the frontalis, that is the only elevator of the brow, and you will cause a brow droop. So these are the common points that you give. You give 1 point at the procerus, you give 1 at the head of the corrugator, and 1 at the tail of the corrugator. Make sure you don't knock off the frontalis. So this is how the injection is given. Make the patient frown, and then I like to hold the muscle in my hand and give the injection in the muscle. For procerus, go half needle inside, aspirate, and then inject. For the head of the corrugator, keep your finger at the orbital margin so that you don't have diffusion inside the orbit, because that can cause a levator paralysis and ptosis. And when you go to the tail, you make sure that you are very superficial so that you do not have problem with diffusion inside the orbit. Now, when you have glabellar folds, you see what kind of pattern it is. U pattern is the commonest, where the procerus and corrugator is injected. When you have a very strong muscle, like in this case, you will have a V pattern, you need to inject more into the corrugator muscle. When the procerus and frontalis balance each other, you just need to inject into the corrugator and the middle part of the orbicularis, which gives you this converging arrow appearance. And when you have this omega pattern, your frontalis is also acting. So you need to go a little higher and give the frontalis and corrugator. And procerus need not be given in this kind of a pattern. Inverted omega pattern, you have the nasalis and the procerus more active along with the corrugator, which needs to be injected. Now, whenever you knock off one set of muscles, the other set will get hyperactive sometimes. And therefore, when you knock off the glabella, sometimes your nasalis becomes overactive and you may have bunny lines. As I said, don't over dilute because then the diffusion will be more and you may have a ptosis. Depth of injection is important and do not massage post-injection. Now, coming to the crow's feet, again, this is because of contraction of the lateral orbicularis. The upper part of the lateral orbicularis is also a brow depressor, and therefore, when you give an injection there, the brow will get elevated, which is a desired effect. Now, this also again has various patterns like the full fan, the upper lid, lower lid, and the central. The full fan and upper lid are desirable. They are easy to do. When you come to the lower lid, make sure that you don't go below the Frankfurt line, that is the line joining the tragus and the inferior orbital margin, because then your zygomaticus major insertion is there, and if you inject that, you will have a lip ptosis, and that will create a problem with the smile. And also the orbicularis is a superficial muscle and the zygomaticus major is a deep muscle. So inject very superficial, inject diluted doses, inject very little quantity. If you have more of the wrinkles in the lower part, then you prefer to do fillers and do not do too much of Botox in that area. So this is how it is done. Keep 1 centimeter away from the lateral orbital margin and make sure you don't go below the Frankfurt line. Now, whenever your zygomaticus major is knocked off, your zygomaticus minor can get overactive and you will have increase in the nasolabial fold sometimes, which can also be a problem. And sometimes when you recurrently give to the lower orbicularis, your zygomaticus major can become hyperactive, causing this kind of a chipmunk appearance. Now, your orbicularis muscle is also responsible for lymphatic drainage, and therefore, if you knock off that muscle, sometimes your lymphatics can get affected and cause accentuation of the eyelid bags. So these are the points that you must remember. Now, coming to the forehead lines, that is the frontalis muscle overaction. The frontalis has a bimodal action. That is, the upper part of the frontalis brings the pretracheal line down, and the lower part is what causes the brow elevation. So keep your injections in the upper part so that you do not have a brow droop, which is the commonest complication of a forehead injection. Keep your injections, and also do not come 2 centimeter. Keep the 2 centimeter area above the orbital margin clear of the injection so that you don't cause a brow droop. We don't go outside the mid-pupillary line because you want the lateral part of the brow to be raised and give that arched appearance. If you go too laterally, you will have this kind of a caveman appearance. But sometimes in some patients, they have fibers even lateral to the temporalis fusion line. In that case, they can have this kind of a Spock appearance after injection. And these patients need a very low dose, even lateral to the temporal fusion line, to prevent this kind of a Spock appearance. Now, another indication of Botox is eyebrow elevation. The points are the same as the glabellar lines. You also give some injection in the lateral orbicularis to elevate the brow. I like to combine that with the filler so that you have even fullness in the filler, and that is a desired appearance. In the lower face, I prefer fillers to compared to Botox, but the commonest indication I use Botox is for platysmal bands as well as for masseter hypertrophy, so that your square appearing face into a more oval face. Another useful indication is this kind of a jelly rolls where you have orbicularis rolls in the lower eyelid. The lower lid retraction should be prevented, so you give very small doses in the lower eyelid so that your makeup does not cake in that area. This patient from the media came to me for that, and you can see that the makeup is no longer caking and she has a good result. Most of the time, I like to combine the filler with the Botox to give a good effect. You must aim to give a natural appearing result, not results like this with a frozen face and shiny skin. And that is all for today. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Preeti. That was extensive, very lucid. All the videos and the sequence of videos, everything was really understandable and very informative. Thank you so much for a very nice presentation.
Thank you. I have a video where the technique is demonstrated. If you have time in the end, I would like to show that.
Sure, sure, sure. And we'll take questions also in the end. There's a question for you in a question answer box also. So now I would like to invite Dr. Kasturi. It is my pleasure rather to invite Dr. Kasturi Bhattacharjee to the platform now. She'll be speaking upon fillers, and I don't think she needs any introduction of any kind. She is a name in aesthetics herself, a diva in her own domain herself, and she has actually gained popularity in aesthetics as well as in cataract refractive surgery. And at present, she's heading both the departments at Sri Shankardev Netralaya, and she's also the academic coordinator there, a writer for many international and national publications, a reviewer for many journals internationally and national platforms. So welcome, Dr. Kasturi, over to you.
Thank you, Shilpa, for the kind words. And at the outset, I'd like to congratulate each one of you, especially Debraj, for this very popular IC, which is running for the 4th year. Very much honored and privileged to be in this course. So I'll be speaking about the dermal fillers of the face. We all know that the facial aging is a multifactorial, complex, three-dimensional, dynamic, and generally non-uniform process. It occurs due to a combined effect of gravity, due to progressive bone resorption, due to decreased elasticity, and also the redistribution of the subcutaneous tissue. So what we basically see that in facial aging, it is often associated with loss of some parts of the tissue, and on the other hand, there's hypertrophy of some parts of the tissue, and thus we need a balance. We need a balance between this hypo and the hypertrophy of the face, and the best is done by injection filler, which balances between the deflation and the deterioration that Shilpa and Preeti has been speaking earlier. So this filler can be irreversible, reversible, it can be synthetic, it can be natural, but what I feel basically I'm more comfortable with the natural source, and most important being the hyaluronic acid. So whenever we try for any aesthetic procedure in the face, be it a surgery or any procedure injectables, we need to assess the face in the hierarchical pattern. The first one is when we do a full face analysis, which Preeti has already mentioned about the emotional attributes. The second, we need to analyze the face on the basis of the 3/3. And the third is more important when you target the specific area, the most dynamic part, that is the periorbital and the periocular part. So when we talk about the periorbital part, what is the most major concern, and it is being discussed in most of the forum, is the tear trough defect. What is this tear trough deformity? It can be a correct deformity when there is a separation between the palpebral and the orbital part of the orbicularis muscle. And this is known as a correct tear trough, but you should know to differentiate between the indirect or the incorrect tear trough, which is basically a separation or a groove between the orbital part of the orbicularis and also the levator superior liginosa. So only if you can differentiate the two, then the line of treatment is different, because in case of tear trough, yes, the treatment is filler, but in case of this fold, the nasozugal fold that we usually say, the treatment is surgery, where you need to do a lower lid lift along with the SMAS and the SOOF lift. So to differentiate these two defects, it is very important. So why does it occur? Because when we are young, we are very proud that we have a positive looking face, which we know as a positive vector. This is because when you see the malar plane, which lies much anterior to the corneal plane, and this is known as a positive vector. And when we grow old, because of deflation, deterioration, gravity, everything what leads to sagging, and this malar plane, which lies much behind the corneal plane, and this is known as a negative vector. This positive, the changing from the positive to the negative vector can have both visible changes and a hidden change. And the hidden changes basically seen in the ligaments, bone, and the SMAS, and the visible is in the skin, but the most important is the hidden changes. As you can see here, the ligaments, which is so important, especially when you deal with the tear trough. This is the orbitomalar ligament that you can see. The sagging of the ligament, the sagging of the tissue, the deterioration, deflation, all leads to all the changes that we have seen here. So when we talk about the management of tear trough, there's a very classical teaching by AMI where you see the 3 points to be targeted is TT1, TT2, TT3, but along with it, you have to do a mid-phase sleep. You need to touch the CK1, CK2, and the CK3. So what is the CK1 point? The CK1 point is a point on the zygomatic arch. This is a very important point because if you touch this point, which is also known as a G point by the plastic surgeon, it really gives a good lifting effect. It gives a slimming of the face, and the most important, it leads to improvement of the tear trough along with the improvement of the nasolabial fold, and it makes the eyes look bigger, and also it lifts the eyebrow. So if you look to this lady out here, and if you draw a line from the elbow of the nose to the tragus, another line from the lateral canthus to the lateral part of the mouth, and then you divide these two lines, and at 45 degree on the bifurcation, you have the G point sitting, which is similar to the CK2 point. And this is the point, these are all the CK1, 2, 3 point are the points of lifting and the slimming of the midface. So when you have a prominent tear trough like this, the treatment is, yes, it is dermal filler. So you need to differentiate when you need to inject the dermal filler or when you need to inject, you need to go ahead with the surgery. So prominent tear trough without much hills, without much fat prolapse, the treatment is the tear trough where you need to inject in the classical 3 points that I have already mentioned here. And the best way, what are the 3 points where to place? If you draw a line just in the inferior orbital rim and 1 centimeter below you draw the second line, and the space between these two lines is the point where you need to inject the TT1, TT2, TT3, and which really corrects the tear trough. As you can see here, all the valleys are being treated. But if you have a young lady like this, which she has got both the hills and valley, she has little bit of fat prolapse and a very prominent tear trough, but then you need to assess whether you like to do surgery or you like to do an injection filler. So if the fat level, or if all the orbital fat lies below or behind the anterior lacrimal crest plane, then this is an indication for dermal fillers. But if you have a much elderly lady where you have too much of fat bulging with this bulging of the fat, which lies much interior to the anterior lacrimal crest plane, then this is an indication for a lower lid blepharoplasty. So this is how we differentiate whether we'll go for an injection or we'll go for a surgery. Young lady like this, and I'm sorry for not a very good quality, just after applying the Prilox, you see the fat bulge here and she has a prominent tear trough. You go for the injection filler and you can reverse this negative vector to a positive vector that you can see here. So these are some of the examples. Like this is just on the table. You can see I use a cannula. You can see this how these hills and valleys get much treated following this injection filler in many of the situation. But if you have a situation like this, a deep valley, then this is the indication you need to go for filler. Filler, there are two ways. One is the injection and one is a cannula. I usually prefer cannula in the 3 most dynamic part of the face, that is the periocular, the perioral, and also the masseter region, because these are the most dynamic part of the face. And I really want the tissue integration of the filler to happen. And especially since the tear trough is such a thin area, I feel that if you go by the cannula, it gives a much better look. So even in this patient, you can see with such a deep valley, you can really treat it by managing with the injection filler. And when she animates, you can see the tear trough and also the changes in the quality of the skin is much better. So we have discussed about the hierarchy 1, hierarchy 2, hierarchy 3, especially highlighting the periorbital region. But within the hierarchy 3, we also have the perioral region, where Shilpa has mentioned the anatomy so well. So this can be managed by an injection technique or with a cannula technique. If you want to augment the pillars, this is best done by injection technique. But if you want to enlarge or give volume and also make the lip look much younger, the best is by doing a cannula. So what I believe, like these patients like this, sometimes they are so fair, like you don't want to have a bruise. Advantage of this cannula is that you don't have a bruise. The patient are much happier. Tissue integration on the table, you can see a very good tissue integration, and you can give a very symmetrical and even look just immediately following the procedure. So this is the main advantage. I feel that especially for lips, now I'm switching all my lips to this cannula. I feel that this is a very wonderful technique of doing a lip augmentation. As you can see here, this is one lady just before This is just after the procedure, and this is with her makeup, with her lipstick, she looks much prettier. So I feel that this filler really gives a very beautiful augmentation to the lips, as you can see here, and these are all being done by cannula. So once we have talked about a hierarchy 1, 2, and 3, now the hierarchy 4 is what the patient needs and what the patient wants. And most of the patient, what they want is basically they want the slimming of the face, and that is best done by the mid-face filler. That were the points which I already mentioned. CK1 being the zygomatic arch, CK2 being the zygomatic eminence, CK3 being the actual cheek point, 4 is the parotid, and this is the buccal point which we usually give for the HIV patient. So in order to make the face look slim, you need to touch the mid face, you need to touch the lower face. Like this lady who has come to me, this is when she just came, and this is up after the second visit, that is with a minimum touch-up. Then when I have realized that she requests more slimming on the face, you touch the CK4 point and you can see the much slimming. And once you want to do a chin and the jawline slimming, the best way is to go for a full face filler. So this is a full face filler where you can see the CK1, CK2, CK3 point all being done by the cannula. And this can also be done by needle, which I have already explained, which depends in which way you're more, you feel it much easier. Then this is CK1, CK2, CK3 point. The CK2, this is a zygomatic eminence, and the CK3 right into the cheek region. This is what Shilpa has already mentioned. You should be very careful, little away from the intraorbital foramen you need to have. And this is a CK4 point, which is basically a parotid region, where you can see I'm using a cannula, and you can go for a very good tissue integration. You can go as high as approximately 0.5 to 1 ml, the full syringe you can use here, depending upon how much slimming of the face you want to do. So these are the main for classical mid-face point. And then in the lower point, we have this, the gonio angle, which we inject, and then into the chin eminence. So these are the points where you touch with a needle. But if you want to touch the labiomental region, it should be always with a cannula. Why I'm telling, as Shilpa mentioned about the myomodulation, you should be very careful in this region, because if you have a reverse myomodulation, this will reverse the direction of the chin and it will be moving upwards. Like this mentalis is the only muscle which inserts in the reverse direction. Instead of inserting into the chin, it inserts towards the lip. So we all know as we grow old, the contracture is towards the point of insertion. And this is how we treat the jowls. And once both the jowls are being treated, so this is the region where, to prevent the reverse myomodulation, we usually go for the filler. I'll just finish it within, I think, 1 minute. And then, as you can see here, like this is how we do the lips. This is advantage is that a good tissue penetration. And this is some of the examples that I will be showing you how you can. I don't know what happened now. You can actually slim the face. Like this is just after the procedure. Like you really look to her. She wanted a chin like this. She wanted a lower face, and this is actually you can do with injection filler. So I'll just touch the 3 important points, some of the complications of filler, because this is very important. We should always remember that filler is a device. It has not been it is not a medication. When we talk about medication, we know there's a different dose to it, like an antibiotic, 500 milligram TDS. But filler, we don't have any dose. So these complications like volume too much, too little, or too superficial, too deep, these complications can happen to anyone, and this can present in the form of Tyndall effect, in the form of the lumps, the bumps. But which way the most important complication is the intravascular complication, which can happen in the form of a local necrosis. But what we fear is the blindness. But in our face, like as I think Debraj has already mentioned, like yes, this filler can be given by anyone. But why we see not a so high rate of complication? Because in the face, we have the 5 functional angiosomes. And these angiosomes, if you look, which have both the choke anastomosis and the true anastomosis. This choke anastomosis, which are in the 5 places of the face, what happens when the filler, even if it touches the blood vessels, it undergoes spasm. So it prevents the spread of the filler, and so it leads to a localized necrosis. But if it enters to any of this major or the true anastomosis, it can spread to the other parts of the face, and also it can lead to blindness through a retrograde flow. So this is very important point that I need to mention you. So you need to have a filler cash kit. You need to have everything with you when you start with any of the procedure. and you should know the concept of hial flooding. Why we say the concept of hial flooding in a case of vascular complication? Because when the filler goes and touches the blood vessel, it releases some anti-hial substances because of so much release of anti-inflammatory mediators. So you need the hial to overcome this anti-hial substance and also to overcome the filler. And this is what I mean to show. This is the anti-hial substance that is being injected by the filler, causing injury to the blood vessel. So you need to counter it both. And it is not that the hyaluronidase or the hial does not have complication. Like this is the last case I'm showing you. This lady, which I have done under eye filler, she was not happy with this part. Like it is not that she is having a lump, but she was something, she told that I could feel that something is there. So I went very smartly and I injected the hyaluronic acid, and this is the reaction that happened after 48 hours. And this has, she presented after 6 weeks of injecting filler. So this can, some of the complications can happen. So we should have a cash kit with us always when we do for any of the filler procedure. And this is ultimately after giving hydrocortisone to her. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
That was a wonderful talk, Dr. Kasturi. As usual, it's never enough listening to you. We want to listen to you more and more all the time. It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce the young, dynamic, and most handsome Dr. Debraj Shom. He runs a chain of clinics all over India. He is well renowned nationally as well as internationally. And over to you, Dr. Debraj, for your talk.
Thanks so much. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks, Preeti, for your kind words. And thanks so much. We'll be taking 2 presentations, one after the other. And the first one will be a combination rejuvenation strategy. And later we'll be talking about how dermatologists and plastic surgeons and all of us need to work together to make our results appear better. Thank you to all the faculty who've been patiently tolerating me and this instruction course for the 4th year in a row. I think it's amazing, and it's a privilege to be teaching you all for the 4th year in a row. Of course, this year we are not there in person. My name is Debraj Shom, and we run a chain of clinics called the Aesthetic Clinics, which is now in 6 cities in India. And there are some financial disclosures in place. I'm a faculty with Allergan for the past 15 years for the Asia Pacific region, a faculty with MERS, which makes Xeomin and all other products, and a faculty with Aptos, which has just entered India and deals with all the cork threads that we will be using in this particular presentation. Understand that beauty is something which is very important in today's day and age. I believe that when we operate or we treat the face, we are actually going ahead and treating the brain. Everything related to confidence is related to your face, and how you look is how you're perceived. And therefore, it becomes very important to take care of this. On a young woman, especially when we look at them at 45 degrees, we see that there is a S-shaped curve called the OG curve. And generally what aging means is that the entire face is moving downwards and medially with age. That's very critical to understand, because unless and until you understand what is aging, how will you really define strategies for anti-aging? And as the hormonal changes occur in women, especially as they become perimenopausal and start approaching menopause, and in men who are above a certain age, essentially the reduction in the testosterone and the estrogen and the progesterone leads to the fat pockets of the face changing. So generally in younger people, there's more superficial fat than deeper fat. And the superficial fat gives us the look of a grape. As we age, the deeper fat becomes more. So as a result of which we start looking like raisins. So when you think about the grape to raisin analogy, you know how aging occurs. And that's why volumization is becoming more and more important, because deflation is playing such a key role in aging. Now, also with this, there's also aging of the other things. The SMAS is aging, the elastin tissues are going downwards, folds are developing. There are various other changes which are occurring. Also, the skeleton is changing. So essentially, the bones are becoming smaller as we age as well. And the facial skeleton is also rotating. This is a great paper by Lambros, and if you have not read it, then I request you to read it, because it will sort of tell you and amplify some of the changes and elucidate better some of the changes which are occurring on the human face. So in general, what's occurring as a part of aging is that the bed is becoming smaller and the bed sheet is becoming more and more. And as the bed sheet increases, the redraping of the bed sheet means that there is an excess of tissue in certain parts. The excess is not that much as the bed becoming smaller. So that's basically what we need to think about. And therefore we use implants, we use fillers with the idea to sort of remodulate the bed, which is the bony structure. Now, it is a little strange, and I spoke about this in my earlier presentation a couple of days ago as well. I always found it a little strange that we didn't understand how Indian faces age. And obviously, when you look at Indian features, we are very different from East Asians, we are very different from Latinos, we are very different from the Caucasian race. So then I always wanted to understand why we did not have enough data on Indian aging. And that's what we call the first aging study from India, using sequential photographs, where we studied 300 participants over the age of 30. And we sort of figured out how people aged over a period of time. So you took sequential photographs and followed them longitudinally. And you found that over a period of time, you could understand and detect patterns of how people were aging. Look at this lady at 23, look at her at 37, look at her at 71, and as she goes to 86. And you see how everything seems to be sagging downwards under the impact of gravity. You see very clearly how the under eye hollows are developing. You also see very clearly how the nasolabial folds and the cervicomental angle is becoming worse as she ages. Similar woman, another lady at 20, 34, and 45. And you see how aging sort of progresses. And as you look at more and more of these pictures, you start developing patterns. Patterns are important, like in disease recognition. Similarly, in age recognition also, patterns are important, because if you can't recognize patterns of aging and you can't understand how people are aging, then how will you prescribe anti-aging techniques? So in general, I request you to read that particular paper. But essentially, the tenets of the paper are as follows, which is the upper third of the face ages very well in Indians, possibly because of the fact that we have a thicker dermis, possibly also because of the fact because melanin in our skins is protective against aging. It's mainly the mid face, the lower face, and the necks which are a problem area. And the buccal fat pads are reasonably well maintained. Now, this is important because obviously, if our mandible or jaw is thinner or is smaller than the Caucasians, but yet the amount of fat that we are putting on over a period of time, or the soft tissue is increasing, then we can't have the same techniques which trainers from the US come in and teach us, which is basically pump the face with fillers. In fact, what we are seeing more and more is what we call the overfilled syndrome, because obviously Indian faces are not necessary to be pumped with fillers the way Caucasian faces are. Now, as aging progresses, we know that there are nasolabial folds, and these nasolabial folds can be graded. And this is a wonderful paper by Lamperl, which I request all of you to read, so you can sort of decide how the aging occurs with regards to the mid-face and the nasolabial folds. Now, if you look at some of our patients, you look at this particular lady. This particular lady came into us, and she had been to a couple of very, very renowned plastic and oculoplastic surgeons. The idea was that she wanted to get treated. She felt that she had squint in the right eye, but clearly you can see the light reflexes in the center of the cornea. And if the light reflexes in the center of the cornea, what's going on? What's going on is that the right brow is higher than the left brow. You can see that there is an inferior scleral show on the right side, which is more than the left side. And clearly there's some form of orbital dystopia because both eyes don't look the same. And when she smiles, this difference between the two eyes gets more amplified. You can see that the left eye becomes even smaller because of the hypertrophic orbicularis oculi role. And you can sort of begin to understand why she must be so distressed. Now, in a patient like this, performing ptosis surgery or performing any other surgery is not something that can be done predictably enough. Therefore, we treated her with Botox 2 units to treat for the hypertrophic orbicularis oculi and a little bit of filler, and sort of transformed her from here to here to showcase that both the eyes now become similar. and there is no real problem which is there. And this patient has been on follow-ups over a decade now, and you can see how by treating her once a year, we are sort of giving her the results and without any risk. See, it's important, see, different strokes for different folks. The point is that people come into aesthetic surgeons when they want to look better. And if you want to make people look better, the risk that we are willing to take on such people should always be a 0% or as close to a 0% as possible. And therefore, it's important to titrate our treatments in that manner. Similarly, another lady, she came in maybe initially about 15 years ago, and she's been on follow-up since then. Today in her 60s, she actually looks better than she did in her mid-40s. And the difference is how incremental changes on the face can make people look better. If people stick to the right surgeons, you can actually have them aging better in their 60s than they did even in their 40s. And this particular lady, when she smiles, you can see why she feels people think she's angry or she's irritated, because lines on the face create perceptions. Lines on the face will get you evaluated on how much energy you have, how happy you are, how sad you are, how important you are, whatever. I mean, it's all dependent on the way your face ends up looking in some ways, right? Because people can't see your heart in the first 7 seconds, unfortunately. So it's going to be a face which is going to rule the roost. And therefore, using Botox in a particular manner, using the fillers which are necessary, using Botox again in dynamic action, all of that leads to a situation where you can sort of take the person from here to here in the space of a few days without risk. Nasolabial folds, when we see it in a light phase, we can easily treat them with just the Juvederm Ultra Plus or a simple filler. And since these are hyalocross fillers, and I'm sort of demonstrating results that we used to get earlier in life when we had only the very initial fillers in the Indian market, and to a situation now where you have all the fillers and the threads that you almost have in the US. But even at that stage, you could sort of do this very, very easily. It's a 5-minute job, and you can remove the nasolabial folds, and that changes the perception of aging. However, when you see certain people with very heavy faces, please note here that there is not only a valley in the nasolabial area, but there is also a mountain in the nasolabial area. So what is happening is that all the tissues are moving downwards and medially. And if you need to create anti-aging, you actually need the tissues to go upwards and laterally. And for you to do that, you'll have to sort of raise the prongs of the face and use a heavier filler in the lateral portion of the face, thereby causing the face to move laterally, and thereby causing the mountain to move upwards, which is in the zygomatic and the maxillary areas. And by doing that, then you can use a mild filler in this particular part. So the combination of the heavier filler, higher G' filler with the lower G' filler can sort of create the results that you're looking at. Facial thread lift is something that we do very regularly. And this is how facial thread lift gets done. And you can sort of So how the facial threads end up doing, what they end up doing is they are made up of a material like PDO or PCLA. And these are threads which will get absorbed over a period of 12 to 18 months. They are like a rose stem because they have thorns all the way around. And these cogs or thorns are the ones which engage the facial fat and sort of pull it up. This procedure is being done just under a local anesthetic, which is prilocaine jelly. And you can then snip the threads very close to the skin so that you can then cause the fat pads to go back to where they came from and sort of raise the face. In a heavy face like this, using the threads is important because by using the threads, you can sort of lift the mountain to where it came from. I'd appreciate it if Mr. Lakhani could just extend my timer for the next 12 minutes, which is for my next presentation as well. I'll just continue from here. Thanks. So if this can be lifted up and then you can use the fillers to sort of coat the particular area, you can give these sort of results. And there are certain scar marks that you see on the patient that is after the carbon dioxide laser has been done on her as well. So it's combination therapy. Now you also can see these, this is my more of our wonderful patients who has a very squarish sort of a face. And you can see that that face, in my opinion, makes her look slightly aggressive because the face is very angular. And using the Juvederm Voluma laterally, using the Juvederm Ultra Plus medially, using some threads to raise her face, you can sort of change the face itself so that there is a certain amount of lift which has been caused in the zygomatic and the maxillary areas, changing the entire way she ends up looking. Not everything will be possible non-surgically, and therefore surgery comes in. And the mid-face lift, which is our method of using, causing the face lift, is very important. And we use the intraoral route for this. So basically what we do is we go from the superior gingival sulcus, and by going through the superior gingival sulcus, we sort of raise the malar fat pad. And by raising the malar fat pad and taking 2,0-proline sutures through the fat pad, then tunneling the sutures up over the zygomatic arch and coming up behind the hairline. And since one incision is inside the mouth and one is behind the hairline, you can now tie this to the deep temporal fascia. The moment you do that, you are sort of hiding all the incisions and yet causing a face lift, which can be seen in how the left area appears much better than the right malar area. And that's how the entire thing works. So if you give traction, you can actually see the traction being conducted, and you'll get, boom, in 45 minutes, a good facelift, which typically ends up lasting for about at least 5 to 7 years. Carbon dioxide laser is important for whatever we do, and carbon dioxide laser plays a very important role to sort of also treat the face appropriately, especially post-surgery and in facial rejuvenation and also in acne scars. This patient of ours underwent a mid-face lift, upper face blepharoplasty, lower blepharoplasty, and carbon dioxide laser. And that's the same sort of another patient who's undergone a mid-face lift, blepharoplasty, carbon dioxide laser, etc. These sort of changes are transformative. I think we should stop looking at people as 60-year-olds and say, you deserve to look like this, because the fact is we will also be 60 at some point, and I'm sure our souls will still be young. There's no reason why our faces can't also be young at that point. Another thing that we do very regularly is to do facial liposuction. So you do a facial liposuction in the part which is extra fat, like the double chin area or the jowl area. Take the fat from a Luer-Lock syringe and sort of transport it to the upper part of your face, which is which can then be used to transform the face. So you can see how the shape of the face can end up changing in these people. Now, this lady came into us and she wanted to know whether we can transform her face and whether we can give her dignity. Dignity is a very important part in all human interactions. She's 47. She had, at that moment in time, just gotten out of a messy relationship, and she wanted to know if we could make her feel happy when she looked into the mirror. And you can create these changes, you know, literally using non-surgical techniques. In her, the Ulthera was done, the Botox was done, the fillers was done, and she was transformed completely. As we move forwards, as we continue publishing papers and trying to push science forwards, we can also see how certain things can be changed. So earlier, whenever you had a squarish jawline, you had to either do orthognathic surgery or do a masseter stripping surgery, both of which led to a significant amount of morbidity. But what we have seen is that you can actually use botulinum toxin. And botulinum toxin is an off-label use for masseter hypertrophy. But what our group did is we actually documented where it should be injected, how much should be injected, how many sessions should be done in order to transform the face completely. Look at these differences. So look at how the shape of the face is changing over a period of time. And you can imagine as the shape face changes, how much transformation can occur in the mind of a person. And you can see that if you've done this if you've done 4 sessions of these, the results are there even 4 years later. So in that sense, it almost becomes like a semi-permanent sort of a treatment. And why would you do orthognathic surgery when you're able to make the changes just with simple botulinum toxin injections, which is predictable, causes less morbidity, and can actually transform faces. We also do a lot of non-surgical rhinoplasty. And initially, when I started rhinoplasty 15 years ago, at that moment in time, non-surgical rhinoplasty did not even exist. In fact, in 2018, when I got invited to Brazil for the World Congress in Aesthetics, at that moment in time, we didn't have any slides on rhinoplasty. But what I'm trying to document and show you is as the products become better and better, and our techniques in using them become better, these are the sort of results you can create. So this is how non-surgical rhinoplasty is done. You're putting a cannula in, you're going pre-smash in the nose, and you're sort of going supraperiosteal, and you're putting the fillers in. And you can also do it from the other side as well. Yes, it's not the same surgery, but you can create some results, as you can see in some of these patients. And more importantly, you're able to even structurally change the nose such that the orientation of the nostrils, etc., start changing. You can also use threads for the nose. And threads, once they are used, these are some of the threads which are being inserted. And as you put the threads in, you can see how transformational some of these procedures can be. This is being done with prilocaine jelly being used. And then once you have used that, you can actually transform the nose with the fillers and the threads. That's one of our patients. And you can see how the nasal bridge now looks far better. And you can see how it has been filled up with the filler and with the threads pulling up. And you can see how the nostrils are far more angulated. And you can also use these particular techniques to hide dorsal nasal humps. And not even that, when people smile, you can actually see how the entire shape of the nose has been changed by just using fillers and threads. And so the question is, when we offer our patients these sort of techniques, then clearly they turn around and tell us that they don't want to undergo surgery. Who would want to undergo surgery with its antecedent and post side effects when you know very clearly that you can give these results even without surgery? So all in all, I mean, it's important to understand that fillers are a good thing to have. You should know when to use surgery. You should know when to use fillers. You should be able to titrate, because ultimately, as we become better at our work, our job is to make sure our patients are happy. Now, you can also use fillers in other creative ways. There's a broad nose. You can see how it looks before surgery, and that's post-rhinoplasty surgery. And after the rhinoplasty surgery, she thought the nose became too small. We've used a little bit of filler post the rhinoplasty surgery to sort of change the way the line looks, how the reflection occurs. Ultimately, fillers is like permanent makeup, and you can use it for a touch-up as well. And look at some of these results, right? I mean, just look at this particular lady. I'm sure I would have been proud of this as a surgical result, but this is a completely non-surgical result. And you can see how her dependent tip, how her beak-shaped nose has been converted to a far more elegant-looking nose non-surgically. So as we go ahead and move forwards, it's important to publish papers which moves aesthetics forwards. In our opinion, every patient we see is contributing to the way people are being treated in the future, and therefore we need to move science forwards. This is India's first paper on using Althera. These are two different types of botulinum toxins, which is comparison of Botox and Xeomin in a split head trial. This is the use of deoxycholic acid, also called Kybella, for the first time in India. This is a paper which talks about how taking selfies, does it lead to an increased desire to undergo cosmetic surgery? This is a new mechanism of using botulinum toxin for facial scar improvement, a new indication for which Allergan now is applying for an on-label license. This is the use of Althera again. This is the importance of the eyelid crease whenever we go ahead and utilize or do a ptosis surgery. This is our own invention, the QR678, which is a US patent and Indian patent, and is now FDA approved in multiple countries and is being exported to 10+ countries. All in all, moving science forwards is what we do. Hair injections, whether that's growth with regards to hair, whether that's any of our non-surgical treatments, whether that's use of any of our surgical treatments and transforming faces in that particular manner, whether it's orthognathic surgery, whether it's any type of surgery that you may think about. Ultimately, we also love teaching. I think it's the love of teaching which has got 4 of us on this dais to try and teach you. And these are courses that we conduct very regularly. As some of you may be aware, our fellowship in facial plastic surgery and facial cosmetic surgery is now recognized by 2 universities in Maharashtra. And by that entire thing, people who get trained in facial plastic surgery and facial cosmetic surgery with our groups can now go ahead and get MCI recognition in the same. The fellowship in facial aesthetics becomes very important for us as well to make. We just completed our umpteenth batch on the 22nd of August 2021. We will be completing our umpteenth batch. We just completed a batch in June. As we move forward, let's try and transform science. Let's try and move our knowledge and others' knowledge forwards and continue to learn from each other and hopefully transform the way the world looks today and will look in the future. I thank you all for your kind attention and a patient hearing. We'll open the floor up for any questions that exist at this moment in time. And thank you once again for your love. Dr. Kasturi, Dr. Preeti, Dr. Shilpa, and I are immensely privileged to be helping you learn and further your practices. Thank you so much. Preeti, there's a question for you. This is from Aparna. She says, how do you document the facial attributes of a patient? And do you have a printed sheet or do you create your own diagrams? We have 15 minutes for all the questions and we can take as many as the participants want to send. Preeti, please.
So normally I have a documented questionnaire which we mail to the patients when they call us for appointments. And in that we ask them what they would like to change on their face. So in that the various emotional attributes are mentioned. We ask them whether they would like to look less sad, less angry or whatever. So that is a printed format. If you want, I will send it to you. And also then when I assess the patient, we assess it in thirds, and each area I specifically mark out when I assess so that you don't miss any area. So even the assessment sheet is printed sheet, which I enter for every patient. I can send you both the sheets if you're interested.
Yeah, so Aparna, please feel free to reach out to Preeti. Always good to see you, Aparna. Shilpa, I wanted to ask you a question while we wait for the audience. I mean, I have seen your evolution. You've gone from being an ophthalmic surgeon to an oculoplastic surgeon, then to a facial plastic surgeon. I've seen you remove ribs in the space of 45 minutes for our rhinoplasties. I've seen you get into facial threads and do your first facial threads and actually paying patients. I want you to take us through your journey and sort of give everyone in the audience comfort that as ophthalmologists, they can do some of the things that we are doing and they can also learn. Could you take us through your journey and how you would tell them to go through it?
Yes, sure. It's my pleasure, actually. So I would say it was unlike such courses, because the time when I got motivated, there were no aesthetic courses going on as such in AIOS itself. So there were very small talks in between sessions, like there was an oculoplasty session, and at the end of that session, there'll be a talk on aesthetics per se. So that was my motivation initially. And then Dr. Devraj took me through a lot of motivating speeches along with the results which I saw, and I then got motivated to take it up in my own practice. And now I have a handful of patients, and I'm being called at many places for aesthetic procedures. So I feel that if you feel that you want to do something, just take it up. And it's a very good field to be in, and not necessarily that you need to leave other surgeries what you're practicing. You can keep on practicing other surgeries what you're doing, but aesthetic in itself is a very good field to go into. And we as eye surgeons, commonly we get patients, with under eye darkness, under eye fillers need to be done there. Usually as ophthalmic PGs, we never understand the concept of fillers for under eye darkness. It is only after learning all these concepts of the aesthetic surgery, we understand how Botox and fillers modulate the changing aging patterns in a face. And it is not that you turn 50 or 60 years, you need these procedures. People actually need them when they are 30, when the aging processes are starting. And I feel that when a person who's at 30 years of age starts getting them done, whatever is required, that person can look 30 years even when that person is 55 years of age. So if you're starting them at 55, you will look 50, not 30. But if you start at 30, you will look 30 even when you're 55. So I feel that's an important concept which people should try to understand. And in our Indian practice, it is difficult to motivate patients. But slowly, as you start going on with it, you also know what you have to say to motivate patients, which is actually right. And they see through you then that you are right and you are doing something nice to them and for them. So this is how you build practice, because in aesthetics, people do not refer to you directly. As in, any of my patients will not tell to their relatives or their friends that I went to Dr. Shilpa and I got it done, because they don't want to tell that they underwent aesthetic procedures. So you have to initially motivate each and every single patient of yours. So I think, but it's a great journey till now, and it will be great, even great further on.
I think two of the points where Shilpa talked about, I want to elucidate on further. 2 points are, first point, when we were getting into PG, at that moment in time, one of the fields that people did not want to get into was dermatology. No one wanted to do skin and VD. No one wanted to treat leprosy. Everyone wanted to possibly get into other branches. Today, if you see, dermatologists have cosmetology as a part of their training program. This entire change did not end up occurring one day. It took 2 decades to occur. Today, every dermatologist actually get, or at least most dermatologists, get into dermatology so that they don't want to practice dermatology. They want to come out and learn cosmetology. I think as these courses become more important, as some of us start doing this in ophthalmology more regularly, as more people get motivated, maybe even in the ophthalmology training courses, cosmetology will become an important part so that people in residency itself can learn this. That's point number one. Point number two is, in my opinion, you should be in a field which is growing rather than a field which is saturated. Now, cataract surgery, how many more cataracts can occur on this planet? As we know, especially down south, now the 6/6s have started to get operated. I mean, you know, there's only now space for the 6/4s and the 6/5s to get operated. So better to get into something like aesthetics, especially when you look at the Americans. The American Board of Facial Cosmetic Surgery, of which I'm a proud diplomate, 40% of the diplomates come from ophthalmology. If they can do it in the US, why can't we do it in India? So we should definitely look to do that. My next question is for Dr. Kasturi. Dr. Kasturi has been a true icon. She has motivated all of us. We never get tired of listening to her talk. And she has also been very interesting because she wears multiple hats, right? She's a director of an institute. She is actually the cornea and refractive head of that institute. She is very well known in giving corneal and refractive surgery lectures, yet she is known as an oculoplastic surgeon. She is at all the aesthetics workshops held by Allergan. How does she manage that entire thing? And how does she sort of demonstrate or demarcate her day in order to wear so many hats? I think that will be very interesting for someone who's possibly in cornea at this moment, doesn't want to give up cornea, but also wants to get into facial aesthetics. Over to Dr. Kasturi.
Thank you, Devraj, for all the very kind words, I should say. Yes, I feel, let me go in the reverse way. When Shilpa was mentioning, I feel that every surgery we do on the eyes, on the face, is aesthetic surgery. Even the endocrine surgery, ptosis surgery, these are basically aesthetic surgery because we need to change. And I always, in all my talks, I always say that there is no difference between a functional indication and aesthetic indication. If you say a person has come for a functional indication, he has an aesthetic concern. If a patient has an aesthetic problem, that means he also has a functional concern. Let me start like one by one. I'll reply to all your questions. Let me start even for a simple blepharoplasty. You know, blepharoplasty, when the patient comes to you for a cosmetic concern, but when you do all the series of investigation, the contrast, the hyoid aberration, the astigmatism, you see they also have a functional problem. And many times patient comes with too much of epiphora. And when you do a syringing, it is patent, it is something like a functional epiphora. You see the big bags, and I have series of patients where after doing the lower lip blepharoplasty, all this functional epiphora has decreased. So there is no difference between a functional aesthetic surgery, both are interlinked. Okay, regarding me being a corneal surgeon, refractive surgeon and also a plastic surgeon. I started my career basically as a phaco-refractive surgeon. And when I was doing the surgery, after doing a lazy procedure, the people themselves, they get motivated and they see that there are some changes around the eyes. Then they realize what is actually happening around the eyes, and they always come and ask me that, can I do something for my eyes? Can I make my eyes look more shining, more brighter? And this is how I decided, yes, I should also start some aesthetic correction around the eye. But I feel that both the specialties are very interlinked. I see that you want only a person who is doing both, cataract, cornea, and oculoplasty, you can holistically manage a patient. Because many a times I see a patient having a cataract, he might be having an NLDO, or he might be having an entropion. So you can holistically manage everything. You can do the cataract, you can do the entropion, you can do the DCR, and that is how you get connected to the patient. I feel the oculoplasty, especially, you need to get connected to the patient. That is very important. You need to understand. Like recently, you'll be shocked. In the last 2 months, I got 2 patients with body dysmorphic syndrome. And this 2 patient has moved many places in the country, and they have gone to many plastic surgeons, but all of them, they're refusing surgery on those 2 young, one a boy and a girl. But I was thinking, since a small issue out here, like one has got a little amount of ptosis and one is very conscious about the nose. Since I was thinking that this thing is affecting the child so much, and everyone is trying, no, because of body dysmorphic syndrome, we should not touch. But it is not there. We should help psychologically in this patient. And if they really want it, we have to take some challenge also. I feel that being an oculoplastic aesthetic surgeon, it is not that we'll take up only the clean cases. We have to take a challenge, and we need to make the patient understand. And also we should make them feel connected. The connection, the communication, all the issues happens with the patients, with your colleagues, everything because of the lack of communications. So we as a surgeon, we should have a very strong communication. We should also show a sincerity or honesty that this is the best I can do. We should never feel bad referring a patient. I know some people, like the job that I can do or you can do, for some reason it is being not referred to you or to me. But why? We need to help the patient. We need to be honest. And which I cannot do. I know there are so many other surgeons they can do. So this communication with the patient, the communication with your colleagues and your friends, that is very important. All the issues occurs because of the lack of communications. And I feel that whatever I am today, I should be always better tomorrow. My competition is with myself. I should not say that, okay, I am doing this because this person is doing. No, I'm passionate about this. And in all my lectures, I feel that obstacle is a pathway to success. There's a very thin lining between obstacle and opportunity. On the obstacle, you should take up as an opportunity. Only when you are good, people will try to give you obstacles. But then you realize you are good. I need to overcome the challenges. I need to take it as an opportunity and modify what I am today. I should be a much better person tomorrow. So these are some tips that I want to give to all of you, that we should be very honest to the patient. Always give a proper direction, because I feel
so here you have to share screen, and PowerPoint is open here already.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Kasturi.
And it is so admirable now saying that such young generations are taking up aesthetic is a very important part of oculoplasty and ophthalmology. What even the laser which people are doing, all the dermatologists doing plastic, but how the laser started? It started with ophthalmic laser. Even see the prostaglandin. It started with an ophthalmic indication, and now people are using prostaglandin as a cosmetic indication. So I feel that the oculoplastic or the ophthalmologist are the person who started all the aesthetic procedure in the world, and every ophthalmologist should have an aesthetic concern, and should whatever procedure they do, they have to prioritize that aesthetic is a requirement for every patient.
Agreed completely. My last question for Preeti. And before that, I will answer one question which has been raised for me. Aesthetic clinics are for facial aesthetics or the whole body, by Dr. Purushottam Joshi. Dr. Joshi, we run the aesthetic clinics like you guys run the eye hospitals, which means that there are different surgeons for different things. There are dermatologists, there are maxillofacial surgeons, there are oculoplastic surgeons, there are general plastic surgeons, there are body surgeons. So there are different people for different facilities, and that's what the aesthetic clinics does for the whole body. Now, my question to Preeti is, Preeti, I've seen your evolution over the past so many years. You are so well recognized, especially amongst AOCMF surgeons, etc. How was your journey? Let's take 30 and 31 minute and complete that journey.
I just wanted to tell you all that I had this inhibition in myself. So I was the roadblock for my progress, I realized, because I thought I don't have the personality of an aesthetic surgeon. So I think that, you need those page 3 kind of circles for you to have an aesthetic setup. But
you are page 3 enough.
That is only the mind setup. No, Priti.
I used to have that,
Surgeons
ma'am,
should
and
have a good aesthetic hand and a good aesthetic mind.
my
That is
most
the-
patients came from my ophthalmology practice and my own consult aware of what I was doing. So I think, it's all near you, which you don't see. And you need to see that my own hospital consultants did not know what all I could do. And I had to sit and explain. So I think education to your staff is very important. Many of my staff gets me the patients. My own ophthal OPD, I find all my aesthetic patients. Every person wants to look good, and you will find aesthetic patients everywhere. Thank you.
So thank you everyone. Thanks.
Let me just comment one thing.
Yeah.
Your course has become so interesting. I could see that one of our very senior DCR surgeon from Guwahati, who happens to be my teacher also, Dr. Biraj Jyoti Goswami. He's just engrossed in your lecture. So I'm so happy now you're converting many of the DCR surgeons also in the aesthetic surgeon. And that is what I wanted to see, that all are interlinked. So congratulations.
No, thank you. Congratulations to everyone.
Something?
Congratulations. I'm just closing.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations to everyone, and thank you so much. And if anyone wants to reach out to us after this as well, please feel free to do so. We remain committed in your progress. Thanks, everyone, and handing over to the next session.
Thank you so much, doctors, for your screen presence out here, for your virtual presence. I hope you had a lovely discussion time. Thank you so much.